Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for the third webinar in the Economic Opportunities and Financing the Economy program. The program is running its third year with the Aspen Institute, and today's webinar is part of a year-long series of online discussions, dialogues, in the series entitled Aspen Dialogues. The Aspen Dialogues series has the ambition of providing a multi-stakeholder dialogue with the aim of achieving consensus, developing concrete policy recommendations, and addressing current issues. And of course, this year has been one of the most challenging years in the past decade. So there were so many different avenues to discuss in the series, from resilience to health issues to the new economic model. And today's discussion is one of the more challenging for the Romanian context, given that we are looking to uncover the elements regarding the new and complex financing mechanisms put forth by the European Union within the European framework. So what we are following up on is a series of discussions on the post-crisis growth and access to capital, which was the first webinar in this program series. The second webinar, taking place later in the summer, looked at the impact of digitalization and the new economic model, what challenges for Romania and the region as a whole. And now we are turning our focus on the specific financing mechanisms that lie ahead of us. So what we plan to uncover in today's discussion is how will the new multi-annual financial framework, its multitude of funding and instruments. We are looking at 750 billion euros in the recovery plan called Next Generation EU. And that, coupled with the next multi-annual financial framework, leaves us with a staggering amount of almost 2 trillion euros for the funding essentially the new economic model of Europe. How does Romania fit into all of this, and how will it take advantage of its opportunities? I'm joined here today by a wonderful panel. I'm very excited about today's discussion. So I will present the ladies first. Mrs. Lara Tasanzanin, head of the European Investment Bank Group representation in Romania. Thank you so much, Lara, for joining us. Mrs. Cristina Buzashu, State Councillor for European Affairs to the Prime Minister, Government of Romania representative. I know for a fact Mrs. Buzashu has been intimately involved with all the planning taking place over the past year, so I'm really looking forward to her input on today's discussion. We are also joined by Mr. Csaba Balint, member of the board at the National Bank of Romania. Thank you so much for joining us. And I would also like to point to the fact that you are behind one of the most comprehensive projects of data, evidence-based policymaking in terms of the panel you put forward with the University Babeș-Bolyai, and I'm sure myself and many other people have watched it very interestingly to see how the economy and the crisis have unraveled in Romania. And Mr. Radu Ciocoiu from Raiffeisen, Executive Director, Regional Corporate and Public Sector Director. Thank you so much, Mr. Ciocoiu, for joining us. The private sector's perspective rests on your shoulders today. And later on, we will be joined by my colleague, Professor Cristian Păun, in both his academic position, but also his position as president of the board of the National Credit Guarantee Fund for SMEs. Thank you all for joining us today, and with no further ado, because I'm sure you all have wonderful and interesting things to share, I will kick off the discussions with an invitation to Mrs. Buzashu. to tell us a little bit about an overview of the main financial instruments available to Romania in the coming years, and in particular, the National Recovery and Resilience Plan that we're all waiting to see. It was supposed to be unveiled later this afternoon, as you mentioned earlier, but I'm sure we can get a quick preview from you today in terms of what does it contain and what are the what are the priorities of the government regarding the recovery and resilience. Mrs. Buzaș, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Clara. Dear guests, first of all, I would like to thank the Aspen Institute for inviting me to this webinar under the Economic Opportunities and Financing the Economy program. I'm glad to see the high interest in our topic today, and I very much welcome the participation of decision makers as well as representatives from the AB and the banking sector. The topic of today's debate is extremely relevant in shaping the future of our post-COVID world by delivering a fast and sustainable economic recovery across Europe. The challenges experienced by the European economies and societies require decisive and responsible actions towards strengthening resilience both at national and EU level. And the crisis has shown us once again that promoting investments and reforms, as well as adequate fiscal measures, are necessary in order to promote sustainable economic growth. Furthermore, our national health systems need to be consolidated in order to build and secure a true European Union of health. As Clara well mentioned, the EU's response to the pandemic brought about new financing mechanisms to counter the multiple effects of the crisis. Reconsolidated MFF of 1.74 trillion euros and the new instrument Next Generation EU of 750 billion euros dedicated to economic recovery, which is an unprecedented amount of almost 2 trillion euros. And following the historical agreement of the European Council in June, Romania has managed to obtain a total allocation of almost 80 billion euros for the MFF and Next Generation EU. And this is a unique opportunity for Romania to invest in projects in crucial areas such as infrastructure, and I'm talking here about transport, energy, digital, but also hospital and school infrastructure, as well as health, research, education, and agriculture, which are indispensable for Romania's development. I think it is clear that quality investments are vital ingredients in our efforts to deliver competitiveness, both for our economy and the long-term prosperity for citizens. Now, as regards the MFF, under the cohesion policy, we have an allocation of 28.2 billion euros. And following a public consultation process under the new partnership agreement, we have proposed 16 operational programs in the following areas: transport, sustainable development, health, education and employment, inclusion and social dignity, intelligent growth, digitalization and financial instrument, just transition, technical assistance, as well as 8 regional operational programs, which will be managed by the regional development agencies from each of the 8 regions of the country. As for the common agricultural policy, we have secured a stable budget allocation of 19.3 billion euros for direct agriculture payments and rural development. Now, under the Recovery and Resilience Facility, Romania will benefit of approximately 30.4 billion euros, which is the 7th largest allocation among EU member states. And of course, in order to access these funds, each country has to prepare the so-called famous National Recovery and Resilience Plan. As you mentioned, we've been working hard in this regard, and the first draft of the national plan will be publicly presented later this week, and it will be open for public consultation. We are keen to receive feedback and suggestions from all interested stakeholders in that regard. Now, the plan outlines the national both investment and reform priorities in line with the EU country-specific recommendations in order to boost Romania's economy and resilience. It is a strategic plan setting out significant transformations that are much awaited by the business community, civil society, and the public sector alike. In the area of investments, the plan is structured on 3 pillars tailored to 12 specific areas. The first pillar is green transition and climate change, and it focuses on sustainable transport by ensuring regional and urban connectivity and completing the TEN-T core and comprehensive network. High resilience to climate change by combating the risk of drought, swamping, and land erosion. Improving the environment by reducing pollution, rebuilding biodiversity, greening polluted sites, and ensuring better access to water supply. Fostering green transition by boosting renewable energy, building specific infrastructures for electricity, increasing energy efficiency, and using green and smart technologies in the thermal and energy efficiency sector. This is the largest pillar. Then the second one is focused on public services, urban development, and heritage. And is centered on urban mobility and regeneration, capitalization of local heritage, health, through better access to public health, including critical patient and oncology services, education, through the development of school campuses for the technical dual education system, colleges for innovative education and smart specialization, as well as student centers for the development of professional skills in order to better correlate skills to the requirements of the labor market. And finally, the third pillar, which is economic competitiveness, digitalization, and resilience, focuses on improving the business environment, developing entrepreneurship and industrial ecosystems as partnerships between SMEs and local authorities, upgrading the economic competitiveness of SMEs by better access to ReTech, industrial automation, digitalization, and technological transfer, including by a consolidated public-private partnership in the field, research and innovation for developing innovative products and services, but also digitalization of public services, including education, health, and e-justice, enhancing cybersecurity, and finally strengthening resilience capacity by increasing medical, food, and energy reserves. Now, this comprehensive set of investments is accompanied by a series of wide-ranging reforms, both horizontal and sectoral. The horizontal reforms are centered on financial sustainability of public finances, social cohesion, and more flexibility in the labor market, while the sectoral reforms support and create the legal framework for the proposed investments, with the broad aim of increasing the quality and accessibility of public services along the 12 priority areas I mentioned before. Also, given the context of our webinar, I just want to point out the obvious need for a close partnership between the public and the private sector. As the current crisis raises so many challenges, it is high time we looked at the opportunities arising in front of us. The Romanian government is committed to a pro-business agenda and is a firm supporter of the private sector, giving priority to investments from both public and private funds. Gaining the confidence of the business environment, but also ensuring the legislative stability and predictability of regulations are main priorities on our agenda. Of course, as you well know, in the fight against the pandemic, the measures undertaken by the government to counter the socio-economic effects focus on financing support programs for the most affected companies, by offering grants and guarantees for SMEs and large companies, as well as public aid schemes. And the government is further envisaging more ambitious programs in support of the business environment, especially for SMEs and new investors. Also, through the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, we are committed to promote access to innovation and technological transfer, cut red tape, facilitate financing for digitalization, promote industrial automation, and also support the construction, food, and service sector, among others, and improve access to financing, including non-banking financial support. And I'm sure my colleague Cristian Păun will be able to provide more details in that regard. And finally, the last area I would like to focus on is green financing, as it's top of the EU agenda. As you well know, the European Green Deal was launched at the beginning of this year, and it paves the way for a new model of sustainable economic development across Europe. Nevertheless, the ambitious target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 55% until 2030 requires complex and difficult adjustment measures for the economy and citizens. Romania is among those member states facing significant transition costs. And for us, flexibility and fairness are key. Flexibility for allowing member states to identify the most appropriate solutions, and assurances that countries with incomes below the EU average will not be disadvantaged. Of course, we have the Just Transition Fund, which will provide much needed support, almost 2 billion euros for Romania. And just to give you an idea, in Romania, the intensity of greenhouse gas emissions from mining and industrial activities is almost 3 times higher than the EU average, mainly due to energy and carbon intensive industrial installations located in the southern and western regions. And in line with Romania's national energy strategy and the National Plan for Energy and Climate, many of these facilities will undergo profound economic transformation or go out of production with approximately 30,000 direct and indirect jobs at stake. Therefore, the Just Transition Fund could support the retraining of those workers for the labor market, as well as the general economic and social reconversion of the affected areas. Could also create new economic opportunities for SMEs, startups, and incubators, as well as support investments in the green energy transition. And in this regard, the government is committed to ensure companies access to financing in order to reduce CO2 emissions, optimize energy consumption, and combat the risk of specific infrastructure and forest deterioration. So let me conclude by stressing that the government is committed to boosting investments, developing the market economy, and creating a friendly business environment for all those who want to start or grow their businesses. We strongly encourage investors to look more closely at the opportunities in Romania, which I think has become an established business destination for investors with a sustainable economic growth, and recently, as you all know, recently promoted to emerging market status by FTSE Russell. So I would like to thank you once again for this opportunity and assure you of the availability of the government to continue the open dialogue with all interested stakeholders from the business and financial sector, IFIs, public sector, and civil society. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions during the interactive session of our panel.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Buzașu. I take this opportunity to strengthen the point of sharing questions to our panelists. This invitation goes to all the viewers on Facebook and YouTube, because this is a live streamed event. So do share your comments or questions for the panelists, and we will do our best to integrate them in the Q&A session. I would also like to mention that the Aspen Institute does its part in terms of contributing to the resilience enhancing conversation. We have started a pilot project on developing subnational metrics of resilience in Romania, because the argument that we are putting forth is that national metrics sometimes leave the reality aside in terms of aggregate figures. We need more fine-tuned measures to be able to design better fine-tuned solutions, policy solutions. And on that note, and with the very optimistic introduction that Mrs. Buzașu has provided for us in terms of the available instruments, I will turn to Mr. Csaba Balint and build on his expertise, as I already mentioned, in terms of the Romanian Economic Impact Monitor. I think that was an exceptional tool for monitoring the impact at subnational level in Romania. We have this dual pressure that Mrs. Buzașu just mentioned. We are facing an economic transition that's been coming for quite some time now, and the recovery post-pandemics. So how does the situation look from your perspective, and how do you assess the current needs will be addressed with the available instruments? You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I would like to thank you for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be here with you. I think this was a great idea to start these kind of discussions. First of all, because that EU funds, I think that that could be a game changer in the following years. So I would like to speak about three key subjects. The first would be a general description of the economic situation. After that, I would like to speak about, very briefly, about a short-term outlook, and finally about some long-term consequences. So in the case of the economic situation and financial conditions, I think that the key message would be that this coronavirus crisis posed a very deep and unprecedentedly deep economic contraction in the beginning of this year. However, the recovery has started earlier, and I think that the monetary and fiscal policies provided a support and helped a lot this recovery process. The National Bank of Romania, but also in the case of the Babes-Bolyai University, we are trying to follow the economy very closely, to see even on monthly and sometimes weekly and daily basis what is happening. And the result shows that March and April was the worst in the case of economic activity. So in March, after the introduction of the restriction measures, the lockdowns, the economic activity fell by around 4%, and April was even worse. So overall, the cumulative loss in economic activity was actually exceeded 15% in this period. So this was definitely unprecedented. We never saw something like that. However, in May, when the economy started, the reopening process of the economy has started. Already in May, we started to see some signs of the recovery. It started to take shape in May, and June definitely was a very strong month, and we could have seen a strong dynamic revival. Regarding the third quarter, let's say that the headline figures were to some extent disappointing. In Q-on-Q terms, the economy increased by 5.6%, and in annual terms, the fall was at 6%. But of course, we don't know exactly the distribution. We don't have a sector level information. This will be published in the beginning of December. But most likely this rather disappointing GDP figures were caused by agriculture. And if we dig deeper and analyze the data on monthly basis, and we have a series of information about the evolution of the industry, private services, construction sectors, and these statistics shows that the recovery process slowed down to some extent in the period of July, September, but didn't stop. In the case of construction, the construction volume index is actually higher than in February. So compared to the pre-crisis period, construction sector performed definitely particularly well. In the case of industry, the shock was very deep, but the gap compared to February has been reduced to around 4%. So I would say that this was a good performance as well. In the case of private services, the situation is more difficult. First of all, we don't have a very good monthly indicator for this sector, but overall could be very similar to industry. But we see divergence. For example, ITC performed particularly well, while hotels, restaurants were affected much more. That would be not a surprise. About financial conditions, when we analyze the data, we can see that the initial shock was very similar to that of what had happened in 2008. But the key difference on this side was that these pressures, these financial conditions, this volatility has been reduced, and the situation become much better. For example, interest rates started to decrease. Exchange rate remained relatively stable. The government deficit was financed from the market, and these are very important differences compared to 2008. And central banks, not only in Romania but across the globe, I think it helped a lot in this evolution. And if we analyze the data coming from the banking sector, we see that loans are recovering. There was a very short period in April, May with negative monthly growth rates. However, since then, there are clear signs that that lending activity is coming back. And again, central banks, overall policymakers, including the public guarantee scheme for companies, had a lot on this front. Of course, in the following period, some fine tunes, in some cases, the programs, the approaches may be redesigned as we have to adapt the measures to the situation, the current situations, and the expectations. But I think that this kind of support will be very important for the economy, particularly as we see that there is a second wave which changes to some extent the perspectives. So about the short-term outlook, the bottom line would be that due to the stronger than expected second wave of the coronavirus, the perspectives has changed to some extent. But overall, we think, or I think, and the research made at the National Bank of Romania, the Babes-Bolyai University, shows that the direct economic impacts could be much lower, much softer than in the first wave. So undoubtedly, there is no doubt we are in the second wave of the coronavirus, and accordingly we see more and more targeted measures. In some cases, general lockdowns were reintroduced in Europe, but overall, the stringency of these measures are milder than in the first wave. And I think that the private sector, the public sector, was somewhat more prepared. So there is a learning curve. We started to learn and live together with this virus. So overall, I think that the most likely scenario could be rather asymmetric W recovery. In the Eurozone, the expectations show up to 3% contraction in the last quarter of this year. In the USA, the situation was looked a bit better, but definitely the epidemic wave is concerning. And in the case of Asia, the situation is different. They manage very well the second wave. But in Europe, and accordingly, we in Romania will be affected. Our economy will be dragged down due to this second wave. But again, the contraction or the risk in the last quarter of this year are lower, much lower than a few months of, in the first half of this year. So I would say that this second wave is rather a slow burning crisis compared to the first wave. There was a sudden shock, and we have to stop everything. This is a slow burning crisis. There is need for patience, endurance until the vaccine or other medical solution could help, and otherwise there are many. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So we hope that somewhere in the first half of next year, the vaccine could be available for more and more people. And as we made a very detailed and in-depth analysis about the spread of the virus, and it seems that as we use masks and we learned a lot of things from the first wave, it is enough to reduce the mobility of the population by 25–30%, and actually this is happening in Romania and in the European Union. And this reduction of mobility could be enough to stabilize the spread of the coronavirus. In the beginning of this year, there was a need for more general lockdowns, and at that time, mobility decreased by 50%, even more than 50%, and therefore the economic costs were much higher than in this autumn period. So the short-term outlook is somewhat worse than we had expected in August, for example, but much better than the situation is much better than in spring. About the long-term consequences, I think that the damages are really huge, and costs are very high. This is a war-like situation, and therefore there will be a need for really well-designed policies on the external and domestic fronts. But EU funds may provide a chance to overcome and actually win these situations. So when we analyze and we see government budget figures everywhere in Europe, in the USA, there are higher and higher government deficit, and it is, to some extent, it is normal, because the economy needs some support, some help. This means that after we can manage, we can solve or hopefully close the epidemic situation, to find a solution, there will be another challenge to manage public debt, and actually the costs we have to pay for the costs of these measures. So this is a very big challenge. How can we deal with these costs in the following years? But I would like to add that this COVID pressure resulted in extraordinary measures. I think that this pushed ahead or accelerated a series of shifts in the economy and in our mental state. So for example, there are structural changes. The home office became very useful and widely used. This coronavirus, I think that so there were a series of underlying trends in the past few years. Technology companies started to change our life, and this coronavirus actually accelerated these changes and trends. So maybe we could say that data is the new oil, and as we had more time to stay at home, and maybe actually in the spring we wanted to go outside and make a visit in the mountains, but we couldn't do that. So maybe these also have to appreciate more our nature overall, what sustainability means for us. And in this period, and I'm happy to see that a European vision started to take shape, and this vision is more sustainable. It is green. It is digital, and I think these objectives, this vision can be very important for the new generations. And there are tools to attain to this objective. And for example, in the case of Romania, 80 billion euros it is a game changer. I'm sure about that, with the condition that if we use these sums wisely. In the past 2 decades, Romania was able to gain around 2 percentage points to get closer to the EU average as measured as GDP per capita. And with these funds, I think if we use them wisely, we can continue on this trajectory. But we need an own strategy. We need wise policies. I think lending, banking sector, capital markets could also help a lot. And we should put more accent on Eurozone accession. And in these conditions, we could overcome on this very difficult on the challenges in this difficult situation.
Thank you so much. I must admit that was a refreshingly optimistic perspective from the economic foresight point of view. So we had this wonderful setup by Mrs. Buzașu in terms of the available instruments, and Mr. Csaba Balint has shared with us somewhat moderately optimistic economic perspective, I would say. So now I turn to Mrs. Lara Zanin. With a question aimed at providing a realistic basis for what we are facing. So my question to you is, what are the major risks, in your opinion, for Romania moving ahead with regards to the new funding mechanisms that the EU has placed before it? So what I'm trying to get at is that we have this wonderful pie in front of us that can solve our problems. What is the limitation to solve the problems? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Clara, and thank you to the Aspen Institute to have invited the European Investment Bank group to attend this interesting seminar. I think we are experiencing such challenging times that it's never enough, I think, to touch base with stakeholders and with relevant ones on this topic. So I thank also the previous speakers to have spared me let's say the need to get into the details of the envelope available from the EU and made available to Romania from the EU in the next 5 to 7 years. As it happens, someone has to say what might go wrong and what can we do in order to avoid going wrong. As Christina's initially mentioned, and you as well, Clara, we are talking about a roughly 80 billion euro envelope available to Romania. To what has been mentioned today, the resilience and recovery plan, but also the just transition mechanism, I would add the modernization fund, which is available to Romania and to other 9 member states facing the disadvantages to transition to a low carbon emission economy. And this equals to another 500 million euro a year for the next 10 years, only for Romania. And this is again to support priority projects in transitioning to low carbon emission economy. So I would add this amount to the whole envelope and the whole challenge of Romania to use these funds. And why not? I will also take this opportunity to mention the other 7 to 10 billion euro that the EIB group makes available in the next decade to Romania if we continue on the path we have been supporting the country in the past 5 to 10 years, meaning that we roughly lend to Romania 1 billion euro a year. 50% going to the public sector and 50% to the private sector, including to support SMEs through our partners, Raiffeisen being one of those. So we are happy to see them here as well. This is also will be available to Romania. All these monies come only theoretically for free. Okay, the EIB money a bit less for free than grants, but almost, we call it quasi grants because they are very convenient. When I say they are free but not free, it's because they come with the strings attached. And it's very important to understand which are those strings, because the risks, I think, lie there. One big string is the timeline. The Resilience and Recovery Plan has to be committed in full by 2023. Means signing the full amount by 2023 and implementing projects by 2026. For a country like Romania, this is very challenging because it requires a very pragmatic project preparation, pragmatic and realistic. It requires an effective public procurement, which we know sometimes is not the case in Romania particularly. You have often complaints from various bidders, things end up in courts, and they remain for between 2 and 3 years, and then eventually bids are cancelled with a loss situation, loss for Romania, loss for the market, loss for everyone, because we have lost 3 years, the project was not realized, was not implemented, and the private sector waiting for this opportunity also incurred losses. And we have seen that this trend has de facto emptied the consultancy and the contractors market in Romania. The good consultants and the good contractors exited the Romanian market because they faced too many times a sort of bid cancelled, court trials that take too long, and I would say non-resolutive public procurement exercises. So when I say strings attached, one is the timeline, which is very challenging for Romania. The second strings attached is actually the labeling, the policy labeling. And when I say policy labeling, I mean the green transition, the digital transition, but also for Romania, the reform angle. We don't have to forget that all these funds are made available to help Romania to transition from the current economy to a low carbon emission economy, and not only meaning exiting coal and moving towards gas, which would not be ambitious enough, but marking the transition to a greener economy, not only green in terms of energy production, but also green in terms of industries. So less emission intensive industries. And if we look at the employment drivers in the Romanian economy, there is still high dependency on both, I would say, the coal-generated power, the gas-generated power, and the emission-intensive industries. So when we say these are monies allocated to Romania, we have to remember that we have to be able to produce projects and implement them. We have to be able to produce the right projects, meaning the ones really allowing Romania to transition. And we have to do this through substantial structural reforms. For Romania, spanning from, I will not repeat what Shaba mentioned from Benere, meaning some fiscal and macro policy type of reforms, but going into some structural reforms that for Romania means, okay, I mentioned public procurement, I mentioned public and private partnership type of leverage to be exploited, but I want particularly to mention this time the reforms on the educational, let's say, domain of Romania. We need, particularly when we speak about the I would say epochal transition we are asking Romania to face, right, from high carbon intense economy to low carbon. We know that, as I usually say, if we look at how many employees a coal generation industry has and how many employees a wind generating power has, we have a proportion of 1 to 100, meaning that the green energy can absorb very little employment coming from the traditional energy type of production or industry. So we have to design alternatives. And in order to do that, we have to upskill and reskill the employees. So we cannot, I don't think Romania can afford to transition in a fair way, as Christina mentioned, and to actually reduce the disadvantages that clearly Romania, like other countries, with a more on their path to convergence towards the EU average in terms of GDP versus the EU average GDP. We cannot do this without a full structural reform of the educational sector. So the risk, how we do face this huge strings attached to the game changer financial envelope as it was defined by previous speakers. I think we need a strong vision from the leaders, the future leaders of the country. Of course, the elections coming up had an impact on this designing process, and it cannot be avoided. People are busy running for elections. There are, of course, negotiations being done among possible allies. The terrain is very challenging in order to have a strong vision, right? Because strong vision can be liked by someone and can be not liked by others. Therefore, so we need, I hope that after the election we will have for Romania a strong majority that can be ambitious and take ambitious and very future-looking visions, decisions, and based on that they will be able to design properly the content of this, how Romania will respond to these various envelopes. So I wish that there will be a vision for that. There will be leadership around it, because it is true that we see a lack of capacity, but I think we see more a lack of resources. And given the fact that the volumes now tripled in terms of grants and money to be managed, we believe that a strong leadership would help using the available resources. And when I say resources, not only financial, but I mean also human resources in both in the public and private sector. The strong leadership would be absolutely a must. Then when I say a vision and a leadership, I also mean that I think Romania has to be ambitious and bold in deciding what to propose where. So certainly the Resilience and Recovery Plan has to be a reform angle. So let's try to focus on reforms there, on something that can be achieved in the timeline that the EU set. As I mentioned before, commitment by 2023 and the implementation by 2026. Let's leave the more long-term infrastructure needs to the MFF, where yes, the co-financing rate is lower, but the time of implementation is longer. Let's not take shortcuts in project preparation for projects that are very complex, like some large new hospitals that we would like very much to see in Romania. Certain projects are long-term and they need to be put in the right envelope where this long-term designing and implementation can fit. And I'm referring to the MFF. When we think about the transitioning and the fair transition, the just transition mechanism is designed for that. For example, the EIB group, part of our technical assistance, is helping the various regions to develop just transition industrial plans. There, let's focus on how to reshape the economy around certain counties, and there is no one solution fits it all. We have to have different solutions for different counties in Romania. We know that, and we are glad also. We are glad to see the academia. Both it was mentioned, Babes Polish with BNR. The EIB technical assistance is cooperating with ASE on this on getting into the country specificities of what just transition means and should mean for Romania. And then last but least, let's have enough space for the private sector investments under the modernization fund. I know that there are some, how can I say, urgent needs to support some coal generation focused complexes in Romania. But I would invite the government to keep a good balance on the project pipelines under the modernization fund between the public sector and the private sector, because I think this government and the presidency with Cristina mentioned it, we finally saw public sector and private sector closer, and we absolutely believe this is a must for Romania going forward. And I will end with an invite for what Romania political context will look like after the election, to have a more team approach across ministries and agencies and entities, because very often stakeholders like us has to run among and between different gateways of the public administration in order to get a concerted and coordinated approach. I think the next Romanian government will need to act jointly with the presidency in a much more team approach, where the Ministry of Youth Funds, which is on the forefront of this challenging game changer, will have to cooperate with the Ministry of Public Finance, but also with the Ministry of Energy or Energy and Environment, whatever this will look like after the elections. But this is an absolute precondition in order for Romania to be able to transform this potential game changer into a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lara. That was a fantastic overview of what needs to be done. Now we have a nice recipe, if I might say so. I think that that's one of the highlights that can come out of this discussion, the need for a concerted position on political will and policy planning. And I think that that's a good match of how our discussions have unfolded so far. And obviously in this process, we need the trilateral actor, which is the private sector. So I turn to Mr. Radu Ciocoiu from Raiffeisen to ask about his input regarding the new, essentially what's different in the new financial framework. We heard that it's slightly more complex. We also heard that the challenges ahead of us are multiple. So we have to deal with traditional challenges of catching up, and we have to deal with new challenges of transitioning to a new green economy. But could you please lay it out for us? What's essentially different, and how will it involve private sector actors differently this time?
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. Good afternoon, Clara. Actually, if I'm looking outside, it's almost evening, so good evening as well. Good evening to our distinguished speakers in the event today. As I'm myself an Aspen Romanian Institute fellow for many years now, it's an honor and a pleasure to be part of this event. And thank you one more time for the invitation. Because timing is of essence, I will jump directly to address the subject. And more specifically, it's how this funding mechanism put forward by the European Union differs from the previous financial framework. And if we are to simplify the discussion and put one word that best describes the major difference on the present financial framework, I would say that the red line, that word would be sustainability. So actually, if we look to the new frame of financing, this is consistent with the EU Green Deal. And some of the details were very well mentioned by Mrs. Buzascu in the introductory speech. And it was a very interesting insight about how the Romanian government is acting on that side. One thing that she was mentioning as well is about the consistency with the EU Green Deal, which had a very important pillar, that was to make Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050, and at the same time to reduce the EU greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% until 2030. So it's a very ambitious plan. What is important to say is that the EU member states during this coronavirus crisis try to mobilize significant resources in order to help the member states to coordinate, of course, their national responses. But at the same time, they were also focusing on supporting on jobs, businesses, and the economy. And actually, very recently, if we are discussing about things that are quite recent, on 10th of November, the European Parliament and EU member states reached a historical agreement with regards to the next long-term budget. And this is another difference comparing with the last exercise with regards to this kind of funds. Because actually now we are discussing about the largest package ever financed through the EU budget. Actually, we are discussing about 1,074 billion long-term EU budget, of course, between 2021 and 2027. And it was also mentioned today the significant amount of 750 billion recovery efforts to help the EU tackle the crisis caused by the COVID pandemic. And this amount, this significant amount, the largest amount ever of its kind, was called the Next Generation EU Recovery Fund. But now I think it's very important to see, because you also asked me, Clara, how this will have an influence upon the overall financial sector. And if we have a broader look, we see that the financial sector can play a highly relevant role in the new next-gen European funding program that I've just discussed, thanks to its ability to act as a channeling agent. Like, of course, we are discussing about intermediary, financing intermediary, but also the financial sector has legacy in the ability to do that. Now, there is a huge potential, and I also would like to underline the potential that this period it's for Romanian economy and for EU economy as well. Why is that? Because we are discussing about a considerable amount to be channeled towards the transition to a greener Europe. So I've mentioned before the big word sustainable. And actually 37% of the funds must be allocated to sustainable projects, while 30% will have to be raised through green bonds. So out of those big amount, 750 million that I've mentioned before. Another important aspect is that around 20% of all grants and guarantee will go to Central Eastern and Southeastern countries, out of which Romania, as we see it will receive around 33 billion euro. So actually 26 billion euro will be accessible in the form of grants and loans, and through the recovery and resilience mechanism. Money that will be dedicated to investments and reforms in green and digital fields. And I'm coming back now to what I've mentioned before of the, let's say, the role that the financial sector can do in this endeavor through its ability to channeling the funds, as I've mentioned. And I would like also to give you an example out of my professional experience. Us in Raiffeisen, we have one of the longest sustainability report in the markets, and we're doing it for 11 years now. We're doing it every year, and this kind of experience with regards to how to finance sustainable business and how to protect sustainability into a business, it's something that was built in certain financial institutions and can help through channeling the amounts to those projects, to those areas that might be mostly influenced in this period of time by the funds that are available to Romania through the program that I've described before. And another thing that is also important in the context is about the financing and the partnership that we also had as a financing bank and also as a bank as Raiffeisen with the Romanian state. Because in the last months we worked closely with the National Credit Guarantee Fund for SMEs, and I'm glad that Mr. Cristian Păun is here, because we had a very good collaboration as well as a bank within these months on this program that I consider to be a success. We also partnership with Exim Bank. And I'm also very glad that apart from Romanian state, we have very important collaboration with European Investment Fund. In fact, we have a historical collaboration with the European Investment Fund that was intensified in the last months in the context that we would like to adapt our products and our collaboration to the new situation. And why am I mentioning those collaborations? Because these are examples of partnerships that unleashed financing in the market, targeting projects that were focusing on investment, on development, and on adaptation, on adapting to a new reality. It's important to know that there is a big debate these days with regards to localizing the production or with comparing to the former reality of a globalized production. Will not get into this subject because it's a very generous one, but it's clear that it's very important for each economy to be able to have a certain let's say control on the logistics aspects of the production and on the value creation chain. And I think that this partnership that we had both with the Romanian state as well as with the other supranational institutions, let's call it like that, made the funds available to the entrepreneurs in Romania in a period that they needed tools in order to face the new reality and also to continue the investment in the project that they consider to be relevant for the actual market, for what's happening in the market right now. So it's important to see all this context also with the European funds that I've mentioned before, because I think that all of them are somehow related. So having the right tools in order to finance, also being able to obtain the European funds in the context of sustainability, which is extremely important in the future for Europe, and I think also for our region as well. I would like also to be here for any other questions that you might have on this subject. And thank you very much for listening me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ciocoiu. I think that is a very good summary of how the private sector feeds into the whole recovery and regeneration, if I might add, process of the Romanian economy. So I will turn now to Professor Cristian Păun for a more micro, although I know that's not necessarily his field of specialty in terms of lectures, but a more micro perspective on Romanian SMEs in his position as president of the board of the National Credit Guarantee Fund for SMEs. How are SMEs in Romania affected by the crisis, and what's been done to save them?
Thank you, Clara. I will be very, very concise. I hope to be very concise in this intervention. So this crisis was very, very powerful. Has a very powerful effect on the economy in general, but also at the level of small and medium enterprises in Romania, due to the fact that these small and medium enterprises are very, very low capitalized. Yeah, there are a lot of companies with negative capital before this crisis. So one problem was this lack of capital at the level of small and medium enterprises. The access to finance, it's a general problem for small and medium enterprises everywhere in the world, but particularly in the case of Romania, because here the banking sector is financing the private sector with a very, very small percentage if we are looking to the proportion to GDP. So we have the lowest proportion to GDP of the loan granted by private financing by financing institution to the private sector, something around 25%. The global average is about 120%. Bulgaria, for instance, has about 50% in GDP, the weight of. So we found small and medium enterprises very low capitalized, with a very, very reduced interest to access the finance provided by the financial sector and the financial institutions. And also, we found these small and medium enterprises that are financing their working capital by looking to their suppliers and their clients, suppliers and clients. And this commercial credit was almost non-financial one. Yeah, so the problem of liquidity occurred from the first moments of this crisis at the level of small and medium enterprises. So a solution could be this very, very extended program, to facilitate the access to the working capital and to the investment capital for this kind of companies, most of them being previously created by with a very, very important support from the state. We are looking to the Startup Nation program. We are looking to the other kind of programs that financed startup of these small and medium enterprises. So we are considering that the improvement in the level of value added, especially in the field of manufacturing, in the field of industry, can be provided by this small and medium enterprises sector that is very flexible, that can face easier than larger companies to the challenges provided by this crisis. And also we tried to diversify the sources of financing, especially the sources of long-term financing for this kind of companies, because today we are looking to the small and medium enterprises that are going to the banks for their long-term capital, and this is not quite correct from the point of view of the cost of capital, but also from the point of view of competitiveness. Yeah, so we should try to push the small and medium enterprises somehow to the capital market, maybe to the local capital market, and if we can, maybe to the European capital markets, by stimulating, by encouraging investment funds, the creation of investment funds, venture capital funds, and so on, that can scale up these small and medium enterprises. It is abnormal, yeah, to finance a long-term investment by going to the bank, because the deposits of the bank are short-term assets, financial assets, 1 year, 2 years. A bank will be always reluctant to look to a small or medium enterprise for a long-term maturity. Yeah, so this was another problem. The cost of capital in Romania is more expensive, is higher than in other countries, and the competitiveness is very affected. So we tried to propose a guarantee scheme for leasing financings. Leasing is very reliable for small and medium enterprises, and leasing, it's a long-term financing scheme that is sharing the risks between a non-banking institution, that is the leasing company, and that small and medium enterprise. We should push the leasing companies of Romania to finance more the investments in the equipments and so on. And finally, we try to propose factoring schemes, a guarantee for factoring financing, and also a guarantee scheme for discounting the bill of exchange, the bills of exchange, in fact, at the level of companies. We are not using such financial instruments today that are very important, you know, because you studied, as I did, international business, yeah, and we know that when you have a commercial credit, it's better to ask for a bill of exchange, and that bill of exchange will be discounted with a bank. The discounting of that bill of exchange with a bank, that banker's acceptance, yeah, when you are doing this, your liquidity will be recovered. Today, the small and medium enterprises are not using this kind of financial instruments for their working capital. So it's a huge, there are a lot of things to be done, yeah, for Romanian financial sector, for small and medium enterprises, and the support of the banks this year was very, very important also, because without the banks, without the support of the banks, this kind of program that was MMA Invest program, a small and medium enterprises invest program, was practically impossible. Today, the program facilitated the access to capital for more than 20,000 companies, 22,000 companies today. Half of this amount, half of these companies, and half of that amount of 16 billion lei, that's about 4 billion euros, financing for small and medium enterprises was granted, half of them for investment done by these small and medium enterprises from Romania. Yeah, it's a very important, a huge amount of money. Just compare with Startup Nation that had a budget, yearly budget of about 500 billion euros. So in 1 year, less than 1 year, we succeeded to do this for this very, very sensitive sector. It's a huge work. It was a huge work, and of course the partnership between small and medium enterprises and the banks, and also the state with its guarantee letter provided for this kind of financings, helped a lot. So we are very optimistic. And of course, we are all together very careful with the use of this capital, with the use of this important financing resources that are not provided by the state. Yeah, we should mention that this amount of money of 16 billion lei is coming from the savings of Romanians that are operated by the banks. So the banks provided this capital, genuine capital, for the development of the sector. And if we are looking to the sector, this is last idea that I want to say to you, why we are considering that the program is a success. Because if we are looking to the dimension of the companies, more than 60% of the small and medium enterprises that applied for this program are micro companies with less than 10 employees. So the banks succeeded to do this, to provide capital, genuine capital, for very small companies. And if you are looking to the top 30 sectors financed by this program, you will see there that restaurants applied also. They are on the 4th place. Construction sector applied also. We have a lot of companies from agriculture, from manufacturing products that are coming from agriculture. So from our point of view, this program, it's a success and will be continued, because today the Ministry of Finance added new budget to the program. Other 5 billion lei were added. So the banks already subscribed for this. They have clients to apply for this. Today, we are talking on the platform of the program, there are 200, 300 companies that are continuing to apply daily, with the help, with the support of the banks. And also we extended the program for 10 billion lei in the agricultural sector. So in the next weeks, the companies from agricultural sector, including the companies that are manufacturing the products from agriculture sector, these companies can apply in a sub-program that is totally dedicated with 10 billion lei only for this sector. And of course, again, the support of the banks, it's very important. We should increase the proportion of the financing provided by financial institutions to the private sector. This is the only chance to develop a nation. Yeah, you know that I'm very, very confident in the power of the capital in the development of a nation. Yeah, I always pleaded for this very important development factor. Thank you. I hope that I provided enough information. If you need to discuss, I'm here. Yeah, I will remain here.
Thank you so much, Professor Paun. I'm very grateful for your overview of the program, especially since it fits very well with the conclusions of the white paper we designed for this year's program of economic opportunities and financing the economy with the Aspen Institute. The report was written before this last seminar in the series, and the report has 2 policy recommendations portraying to SMEs. One is financing competitive businesses, and the second one is financing entrepreneurial initiatives. So you checked, let's say, the in-house program perspective. And I would also like to add that it's a discussion that's not being solely regional to Europe. I know that for a fact that in the United States, the stimulus packages are seen as a way to jumpstart the economy as well. And so I would like to end off my moderator's position in this panel with a final question to all of you, to all participants, which is a very brief 1-minute type of answer question about the areas where you feel that the new stimulus packages that are in front of Romania and Romanians and Romanian businesses, what are the 3 areas where this impact will be the highest, the most positive effect, let's say. And I will give the floor first off to Mrs. Tasanzanin, because I know she's running out of time with us, running into another meeting, but I would like to start off with you.
Thank you very much, Clara. Thank you very much. I will be extremely brief. Based on what I have mentioned earlier on, we think there should be a smart design. So different priority areas on depending on which instrument we are talking about. So if we look at the resilience and recovery plan, is designed to support reforms. And for sure, we see three top reforms that Romania will have to deal with. One is the labor market reform to support even further the business climate in the country. The second one is the education reform I was mentioning before, upskilling and reskilling the labor force, which is partially linked to the one before, but it's complementary. Entre parentheses, in Romania, we have the lowest number of trained employees in the whole Europe. So the SMEs and the large and small corporates are not training their employees, neither to upskill them or reskill them if need be. The third reform should be on the public administration side, to make it digital, to make it less of a burden, and to make it actually a friend of Romanians if they want to pursue and to build a sustainable and greener Romania for the future. If I look, and I will conclude with that, if we look at the MFF, we think that the priority should be given to the health sector for sure, to the agricultural sector. When we say agriculture, we think that there is a huge potential for this sector in the country. Particularly not so much only on the raw material as usually of course the common agricultural policy as the framework, but is more on sustaining the agribusiness part, on sustaining the full chain across the agriculture, particularly to work where the margins are a bit higher. So on the food processing, on this bio trend that we see across Europe, we think that Romania has a very, very important role to play. And last but not least, if we are going digital, we believe, of course, that the IT potential of this country is very important. And when I say IT potential, is not only to see the IT brains of young Romanians being serving the interest of companies somewhere else in the globe, but to have a business climate which will allow Romanian companies, Romanian startups to be Romanian, to grow in Romania, and to remain Romanian for a good part of their business life, in order for the economic advantages of this sector to remain in the country and build a structural, sustainable economic growth of this country as well, in particular. So with this, I conclude, and I'm very sorry I will not be able to stay longer, but if there is any specific question addressed to the EIB group, and in this EIB group, I mean the European Investment Bank and the European Investment Fund that was mentioned by Raiffeisen as well, by Radu, I'm available to answer offline whenever they are sent to the Aspen Institute. Thank you very much for this organizing this event, and for all the speakers, and of course for Clara's moderating role. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. So
Bye.
I will give the floor next to Cristina Buzashu. I know you already mentioned the 3 pillars of the recovery and resilience plan. What are the main takeaways in terms of the highest impact that this funding can do for Romania?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Clara. Of course, the overall underlying objective of the new funding mechanisms, both through the cohesion policy under the MFF and the National Recovery and Resilience Plan under the RRF, is to promote the economic development and resilience. But to choose 3 areas with the highest impact, I would say the first area, especially in the context of the pandemic, is the health system. And it is worth highlighting here that the government's decision to set up a dedicated health operational program under the new partnership agreement, combining different funds available from the cohesion policy, as well as dedicated investments and reforms of the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, which amounts to a total of 4.6 billion euros for health in the period 2021-2027. The second area, which is of course the largest under the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, is sustainable infrastructure, and Romania really needs it. And this has a total allocation of 21.4 billion euros, and in particular sustainable transport, railways, a metro or underground system, and smart highways, intended to increase connectivity, especially as regards completing the 10T core and comprehensive network, but also, as I mentioned before, environment and climate change, green energy, thermal and energy efficiency, with a focus on residential and public buildings. And finally, as Lara also mentioned, I think digital and green transition, which are the two main priorities at EU level, with also set targets of 20% for digital and 37% for green under the RRF, as Mr. Chocoyu well mentioned. So the two priority. As regards digitalization, I would mention both the digital transformation of private sector companies, thus boosting their competitiveness, but also the digitalization of public administration and public services, such as health, education, and e-justice, as well as the digitalization of the fiscal administration agency, which I know for many Romanians would be quite important. And finally, as regard the green transition, I already talked about the Just Transition Fund, but I would also like to refer a bit to circular economy. Romania has revised its national strategy for sustainable development, which is dedicated to ensuring the transition towards a circular economy. And the work is now underway for creating the implementation mechanism. And well, during the past years, Romania has significantly improved its performance in certain pillars of the circular economy, but of course, improvements are still needed, and we welcome investments in this area. And finally, I would just like to emphasize the importance of the collaboration between the public and the private sector in all of these areas. So this is my take on the top three areas, but I'm happy to provide more details if needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful overview that fits so well with the strategic foresight process, which looks right. It looks at the green, digital, health, and socioeconomic. And I think that's a nice way to align the perspectives of the Romanian interventions with the European ones. Thank you so much, Mrs. Buzashu. Mr. Csaba Balint, you have the floor.
Thank you. I will have a very similar answer. I put on the first place, I put infrastructure. And of course, this means, we need highways, motorways in order to connect Iași, Constanța with Cluj, Oradea, and with Western Europe. But infrastructure means also, as it was already said, digitalization of the public sector, digitalization of the tax collection authority. That it would be very, very important, and more generally the public sector. And infrastructure means also schools and hospitals and everything, training and education, what is needed to implement and use these kind of new infrastructure. And on the second place, I put equipments, investment into equipment. So research shows that if you invest into equipments, new production lines, if we could adopt technologies which are working well, for example, in Germany, in the USA, that could could help the productivity of Romanian companies, SMEs including. So that would be very, very useful and very important. And if we have a technology similar to that of our Western European or US peers, the third place research in order to push the boundaries of knowledge. And in this case, I would underline AI. That could be a very interesting area. Romania has a very relatively strong IT sector, and we have people and some expertise on IT, and we could build on that. Another area could be health. So research in health and sustainable energy, as it was also said, Industry 4.0. And I just would like to add that money is not enough in this process. The quality of collaboration between different sectors, between universities, between the public sector and private sector would be at least as important than money.
I must confess I'm writing down our highlights of the discussion, because after the webinar, as it is the traditional manner of the Aspen Dialogues, we will produce a brief synthesis of the discussion. So I am stealing your ideas for this material, if I might say so. Thank you so much. I turn to Mr. Radu Ciocoiu, because you already mentioned sustainability, and there is such a vast divide in terms of innovation, as Mr. Ceaba-Balin mentioned, and sustainable efforts in terms of what you mentioned. There is such a wide divide between East and Western member states in the European Union. How can Romania make the best of the opportunities that lie ahead of it to catch up?
Yes, indeed, it's a very good question, because actually, I think that if we look to those three areas or three aspects that you mentioned before, I think that there are some also keywords. One of them is adaptability. So we should somehow channel the funding to the ability or to the entrepreneurial part to be able to adapt. To adapt is not an easy process, and it needs support. And I think that we have a history that we are also able to channel to adaptability. At least in this year, it's a very good example. The second key point that is very related to adaptability is about sustainable business. And why is that? Because as we see, there are a lot of opportunities in order to readjust the existing businesses or building the new businesses on a sustainable approach. And it's also about a higher purpose with a positive impact on the quality of life. But what is also important to see, and we've seen in this webinar, that it can also be a profitable endeavor. It's under a profitable setup. And that is very important, and it might be different from other periods of time in our history. And the third one, it's the partnership. I mean, as we see it in 2020, and as we are expecting for 2021 and the next years to come, partnership between companies, financing institution, and a state, it's extremely important in order to unleash the full potential of the financing that we and liquidity that it's available and will be available in the near future. So actually are the three words that are very close connected to one another: adaptability, sustainability, and of course, partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think my colleagues have a Twitter feed now to post on today's discussion. And I will turn to Professor Paun. Cristi, give us your thoughts.
I will be very short, I hope. We should be very careful with this idea of green, because we hope to be greener than today, but this green means a lot of things. So I'm not so confident that this huge efforts of European Union to become greener will be a totally opportunity for a country like Romania. We have a lot of problems, as I said, so we should pay attention to this. I'm thinking about gas, for instance. Yeah, greener means that we have a huge pressure on the gas reserves that we discovered in the Black Sea. So it will be a problem, yeah, this idea of greener Europe. And maybe the more powerful countries will try to turn into their favor this idea against smaller countries like Romania is. And of course, the medical problem, it's a problem, but the presence, the perspective of the vaccine today is changing a lot, and we should move forward very quickly, because in few weeks, maybe the situation will be totally different than today, if those vaccines will be delivered to the countries. Yeah, as we heard, Romania will receive about 5 million vaccines doses in few weeks. So it will be a very huge change in this fight, medical fight with the pandemic situation. So we should move forward more to the economic problem. And in my opinion, of course, the intervention of the states are important, but are more important maybe in the medical area, but not in the economic area. Yeah, so I'm totally agree that the private sector should be the source of our development and our recovery. Yeah, so we should pay more attention to this private sector, to the markets, to the capital markets, financial markets, and to try to limit somehow this kind of intervention. We are printing money to subsidize the private companies, because if we are doing this, in fact, we are failing our endeavors to develop somehow. Redistribution is not the solution for the development. Is not a solution, because when you are redistributing, you are taking money from somebody and you are moving this amount to somebody else, mostly on discretionary ways. Yeah, so I think that we should be careful with redistribution, especially when we are talking about the private sector, and to try to move from subsidizing, from this kind of intervention to more freedom, more economic freedom, more free markets, yeah, freedom of the markets, and so on. Yeah, simplifying the bureaucracy, the mechanisms, reducing the intervention of the states on all fields.
So a growth-friendly environment, business environment, and I I hope with this we can sum up a discussion that's been, once again, I must confess, cautiously optimistic, and I think that fits well within this stage of the pandemics and the economic recovery. It's a good time to look ahead at solutions, not just problems. And I'm very, very grateful to all the participants that were with us today and provided such valuable inputs with regards to what we have at our disposal, to the Romanian institutions and business actors, but also what should be done in terms of specific pathways out of the crisis. So thank you all so very much. Unfortunately, we've even run over time. I am very grateful for the panelists' time and input, and I thank all the viewers that were with us today. The live stream will be available on YouTube for anyone who wants to check out the discussions that were taking place today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All the best.